In our first project, we're going to look at preparing and different paint finishes. First of all, we're going to take a look at painting new woodwork. Begin by rubbing down the wood with glass paper, always remembering to follow the direction of the grain. Never rub against the grain. Now brush down the woodwork with a soft brush. Remove any door furniture. On new woodwork, it's advisable to seal the knots, otherwise the knots can weep, which causes the paint to discolor. Apply the knotting with a small brush and leave it to dry. Secondly, pour a quantity of wood primer into your paint kettle. It's not recommended to apply paint directly from the tin. The reason for this being to keep out any dust and dirt, and it reduces the time that the paint is in contact with the air. Clean out the kettle after each use. With a small quantity of paint on the brush, apply in the direction of the grain. Hold the brush as you would do a pen, and apply using gentle strokes. Don't use a scrubbing motion. Leave the primer to dry. Now fill any small holes with a good quality filler. Use a spatula to apply it. Lightly rub down with a fine grade of glass paper, again following the direction of the grain. Now the door needs to be undercoated. Choose the correct undercoat that's recommended for your final paint finish. Follow the same procedure as with the primer, that's to say, small amounts on the brush applied in the direction of the grain. Long, smooth brush strokes will give a high-quality finish. Cutting in around glass can be achieved with the edge of your brush. Note the technique. Alternatively, the glass can be masked off with tape. Leave the undercoat to dry. Lightly rub down as before. Now apply your top coat. There are many different finishes readily available. Full gloss, eggshell, and satin wood. These are all applied in exactly the same way. Remove any bristles that happen to come out of the brush. This is more likely to happen with new brushes. Here we're going to see how to redecorate previously painted timber. Remove any loose flaking paint with a scraper. Sand down with a coarse-grained glass paper. By removing your sanding block, you'll be able to get well into any intricate moulding. Brush the paintwork and the floor down to stop your brush picking up any dust when painting. To remove any grease buildup, it's recommended to clean off the paintwork with a good quality degreaser and cleanser. Here we're using a powder form which needs to be mixed with water. Follow the maker's instructions. Brush the solution onto the paintwork, then wipe it down with a damp cloth. Your undercoat can now be applied. Following the same technique as before, any bare exposed timber will need to be primed. After this is dried, lightly sand it down with a fine glass paper and finish off with your chosen top coat, as before. Finally, we're going to see how to strip old paintwork and stain the wood. If you're going to use a hot air gun, wear protective eyewear and gloves. Heat the paint until it begins to bubble, taking care not to overheat it and scorch the wood. Follow along with a scraper, removing the paint. Now, this process may require some practice. Now sand down the woodwork with a coarse glass paper. Remember to follow the direction of the grain. Now brush off any dust. There are many different colors and finishes of stain available. Choose the one appropriate for your decor. As with all woodwork finishing techniques, apply small quantities. Spread evenly, following the grain. A second coat may be required, but remember to sand down in between coats. The more coats that are applied, the darker the finish will become. Preparation and paper hanging. Remove your old wall covering. You never want to paper on top of old wall covering. Score any remaining paper with your scraper and apply a liberal amount of water. Leave the water to soak into the paper for a few minutes, then try and remove the remaining paper with your scraper. When you choose your wall and ceiling paper, check with the stockist what any symbols mean. They explain to you pattern repeats, color shading, and so on. Cut a piece of paper off the roll to length, allowing approximately 100 to 150 millimeters extra. Using a paste table, paste the paper, making sure that all the edges are covered. Try to avoid getting any paste onto the table. Fold the pasted faces together. This allows for easy manageability for longer pieces. Finish pasting your cut-to-length piece. Papering a ceiling can be a tricky process. Always work off a stable platform. Never overreach. You may find it useful to rest the folded paper on a stick, or even on another roll of paper, as you can see here. We're using the plaster coving as our straight edge to work from. It's advisable to check which is the straightest edge, then work from there. Once you've lined up your edge, smooth the paper out with a paper hanging brush. Make sure that all the bubbles and creases are carefully smoothed out. Open the paper out in stages, smoothing as you go along. Repeat across the width of the room. Brush over the paper a second time. Mark any edges with a pair of scissors. Pull the paper away and cut. Brush the paper back into place. Make sure that all the edges are firmly fixed. Identify the pattern repeat and mark both pieces of paper for ease later on. Measure the piece, cut, and paste. Put the paper onto the ceiling. Now line up the pattern. Identifying the pencil marks, make any fine adjustments. You'll discover that the paper will slide around quite easily when the paste is still wet. Smooth out. Move across the ceiling as before, taking care. Only apply small pieces of the length to the ceiling at any one time. Cut around any external corners by marking with the scissors as before. When the ceiling is finished, if you've used a paper that needs emulsioning, we recommend the use of a roller. First of all, brush emulsion around the edges and the coving. When using a tray and roller, it's important to get an even covering of paint onto the roller. Pull small amounts of paint onto the grid, turning the roller as we've demonstrated here. It's worth mentioning that various roller pile thicknesses are available, depending on the density of the textured surface to be covered. The secret of a good roller technique is a slow, even action, no jerky movements. This avoids any paint splattering and will result in a good overall coating. Always work small block areas at any one time. Newly papered ceilings may require more than one coat. Now we're going to take a look at wallpapering. When papering previously decorated walls, it's advisable to cross-line. This helps to cover any imperfections in the wall from showing through. Measure up the length as required. Cut and paste. Make sure you achieve a good paste covering. By lining up the edge of the paper with your paste table, you can avoid getting any paste onto the table. Folding the pasted face together will make it easier to carry the paper up the steps or ladder. Line up the paper with the ceiling or coving. Cross-lining paper always goes across the width of the wall, not from top to bottom. Smooth down with your paper hanging brush. Make sure any bubbles or creases are removed. Cut and paste your next piece. Leave a 1 or 2 millimeter gap between each piece of paper, otherwise you'll see the join through your top decorative wall covering. Internal corners should be cut, but external corners can be papered around with one complete piece of paper. If severe creases are apparent, don't attempt to brush these out. Peel the paper away from the wall and reapply by brushing it back down in small sections, as demonstrated. Continue to cross-line the rest of the room. Leave to dry completely before attempting to hang your decorative wall covering. Once the room has been completely cross-lined, it's time to start paper hanging. In this instance, we're going to decorate the room with 2 different papers, dividing these up with a decorative border paper. Measure the length where the border will be placed, in this case at dado height, and square around the room with a spirit level. Measure off widths of the wallpaper in order to avoid having to fix a small narrow piece at one end. If this is the case, start with the narrower cut-down piece of paper, as in this example. Measure the desired distance from the corner, and square off with a spirit level. Never assume that the corner of the room is square. Work to your true vertical line. Now measure the length of the piece of paper that will be required. Cut this length from the roll. Always make sure your paste table is clean. Sponge down with clean water. Square off the measured length and cut with scissors. Always allow an extra 5 or 10 centimeters. Don't cut it to the exact length. Paste the paper, making sure that all the edges are covered. Now, carefully remove the pasted paper from the pasteboard. Line up the edge of the paper with your vertical line. Smooth the paper over with your damp sponge. Make sure that you remove any creases or bubbles with the sponge. Run the edge of your scissors over the paper so as to mark ready for cutting. Peel the paper away from the wall and carefully cut along the mark. Now finally, smooth it back into place with your sponge. Paste up another length of paper in readiness. The pasted edges can be folded together for easy handling. Apply this to the wall, taking care to match up your pattern. Open out the length. Here we've cut a small hole in the paper to allow for a wall light cable. Check the position of the cable and make a small hole in the paper. Thread the cable through the hole. Smooth down the paper with your damp sponge as before. Continue around the room until the top half of the border paper is complete. Papering below the border is exactly the same. Square down the joint from the paper already hung in the corner of the room. Measure the paper width. Mark this onto the paper. Remember to add a few extra centimeters. Now cut this. Paste the length of the paper and position it up against the wall. Don't forget to match up your pattern. Now smooth down with a damp sponge. Trim to size. Sponge the paper back into the corner. If you find you have to paper around switches or plugs, isolate the main power supply whilst decorating. Remove the fitting and paper over the hole. When the paper's dry, locate and trim with a pair of scissors. Now it's time to fix our border paper. With a spirit level, draw a line around the room at dado height. Apply a good quantity of paper adhesive to the border paper. Now fix this to the wall, leveling up with the pencil line. Trim to size. And finally, smooth it down with your sponge. In a lot of cases, you may have to remove a radiator to decorate. Here, we're going to show you how to do this. Turn off the water flow valves. If the radiator has a thermostatic radiator valve fitted, remove the valve head and fit the sealing off cap. Now loosen with grips. Place a bowl underneath the valve. The radiator will begin to drain. Open up the bleed valves to drain down completely. The air intake will force the water out of the radiator. Place tissue into the radiator valves to stop any drips of water when you remove it from the wall. The radiator is now ready to remove. To replace or refit the radiator, apply sealing paste to the valves. Now hand tighten the nuts. Finally, tighten the valves with grips. Replace the thermostatic radiator valve head, open both of the valves, and bleed the radiator to remove the air.